Hey there, folks. Welcome to Broadband Deployment News. Several ISP associations are suing the FCC over their recently approved net neutrality rules, and several of them have petitioned the FCC to stay those rules because of other court cases that are working through the system. Be right back to take a look at that. Thanks for joining me. Rick Husey here with Zecorum with Broadband Deployment News. So I want to take a look at this this petition here. And as I mentioned, this is from several internet service provider associations that we'll see here. So it's a joint petition for a stay, and you can see it. It's counsel for the NCTA. That's a big cable. What started out as a big cable association, cable provider association, Florida, and that's this particular set of attorneys here. NCTA, Florida Internet and Television Association, the MCTA, which is the Missouri Internet and Television Association, Ohio Cable Telecommunications Association, and Texas Cable Association. Then over here, we've also got counsel for US Telecom, also NCTA, so maybe they work with both. The Ohio Telecom Association, which is probably different from Ohio Cable Telecommunications Association. Then we've got counsel for CTIA, that's the Wireless Association, and counsel for ACA Connects, that's used to be the American Cable Association, now they just call themselves ACA Connects, as a lot of these cable associations are now working with all kinds of providers. It could be cable, it could be telephone. Then we've got WISPA, this is a Wireless Internet Service Provider Association. So those are the folks that have submitted this petition, and you can see here, and I've linked to this in the description of this video, you can see here what they are saying. They've got petitioners are likely to prevail on the merits. Then they talk a lot about the balance of harms and the public interest support. So unlike what the FCC is saying, they're saying that it's actually in the public's interest not to do this because more regulations means less money to do the things that really need to be done with broadband, kind of chilling the industry, those kinds of things. So I just want to look at a few things in here. Again, I linked to this, but I'm going to scroll down here to a couple of points. They've got an introduction and some background that talks about this. Then they get to their arguments, and I want to talk specifically about the arguments here in the beginning. Petitioners are likely to prevail on the merits, and I think they're right. I think the FCC pushed forward with this, but it's very unlikely that, if this is, again, looked at by the courts, that it would be allowed to proceed or it would be reversed even if it proceeded. So what they're trying to do here is they're trying to get the stay in place, and they'd like it to be done, that they said, by June 7th, which this week would be Friday. And the reason they want to do that, from what I understand, is because there's a New York law that was part of a budget where every New York ISP would have to offer internet services. It was a certain speed. I forget, it might have been 50 megabits per second or something like that. They had to offer a certain speed product if they wanted to operate in the state for $20. And I think it was 50 megabits per second. I think there was maybe a one for $40 that was maybe 100 megabits per second. I can't recall the details. But in any event, it was part of the budget. And that would be telling private businesses, what they can charge for product. So the ISP sued on that, and they won, but then it was reversed in an appellate court there. So now they're under that reversal. And I believe they'd like a decision by Friday, because that's when they're going to decide whether they're going to move forward with appealing further this New York rule that is making it where they have to offer a product. If they're going to operate in the state, they have to offer a product at a specific price. So they're being dictated what they can sell and at what price in the state of New York. But there's other court cases that they are involved in order to try to reverse these net neutrality rules. Plus, there's one that's already been heard in the U.S. Supreme Court that's not related to this. It's related to this weird fish monitoring thing. But there's a key component of that that is called Chevron deference, and also a major questions doctrine. So major questions doctrine is something where the courts have recently pulled back on the idea that an agency has a lot of leeway or latitude if something was not covered in legislation then the agencies have basically been given deference as to whether, to fill in the blanks on things that were not clear. But there's something called a major questions doctrine, which has come up, that's the courts have been leaning more into, that says if it's a major question and it was not covered in the legislation, then because it's a major question, the agency doesn't have the latitude and needs to go back to either the courts or the Congress needs to clarify it, those kinds of things. So this major questions thing is one reason I think that this would be reversed, because I believe the court, as it is today and as in the direction it's been moving, is wanting to give less deference or less leeway to agencies like the FCC when there's a major question and they are trying to interpret that rather than having the courts interpret it, or rather than having Congress go back and clarify what they're doing. So you see here, under the major questions doctrine, when an agency claims to have uncovered an extraordinary grant of regulatory authority, it must point to clear congressional authorization for the power it claims. So if the power they're claiming comes from the Telecommunications Act of 1996, and they're claiming what they've done is they've reclassified broadband service or broadband providers as a common carrier under the Communications Act, which would put them under Title II of that act and give the FCC much more regulatory control over broadband providers instead of under Title I, which is what they have been under. In Title I, that's because broadband has been considered an information service and not a telecommunications service like phone service, for example. So they're claiming that this right here, they would be unlikely to prevail on that. The Commission's reclassification of broadband under Title II is a major question. The Supreme Court has described a variety of factors that make a rule major. All of the most relevant factors apply here. First, subjecting broadband to Title II would bring about enormous and transformative expansion in the Commission's regulatory authority, and that's true. Now, the Commission has said we're going to we're only going to enforce certain parts of that. So there's certain things we're not going to do. For example, price regulation. They've come out flatly and said, even though we could, under Title II, regulate prices, we're not going to do that. And that's one of the reasons why this New York law that went into effect is important, because now that the FCC has said we are not going to do this price regulation, then there's a question as to whether the states can actually do that. So I think that's all kind of wrapped up with that. It does not matter whether or how the Commission is currently exercising that authority, because the major questions doctrine depends on the underlying claim of authority, even if not fully exercised. So even if they're not necessarily going to implement everything, they would not have that authority anyway. They shouldn't have it, even if they're not going to implement everything that they would have authority to do. Second, the economic and political significance of the Commission's claimed authority is staggering by any measure. So in other words, it does have a significant impact, and is obviously controversial. I mean, that's just a thing they don't even mention here, but you've got lots of people that want net neutrality. Everybody wants net neutrality. I've made this point before. Everybody wants a net neutral internet. But what a lot of the public and groups that are promoting net neutrality regulations, a lot of times they don't tell you or they don't know that it's not about net neutrality, it's about regulations, okay? Because we have been net neutral this whole time. There's not been a time when we haven't had net neutrality on the internet. There have been one or two incidents that have been dealt with, and they were dealt with generally without net neutrality regulations. But the internet is net neutral. You can get wherever you want. If it's legal content, you can go there. There have been some questions about maybe some, throttling some competitors, and again, those things have been handled. There have been questions about fast lanes where, where you've got peering partners. You might have like a service provider like Netflix and a internet service provider like Comcast, and there was some deals with a fast lane where maybe Netflix would get prioritized treatment if they paid more for that, and there were questions about that. So fast lanes, they were trying to deal with that, but again, in general, the internet's been net neutral. You can get wherever you want. Nobody's going to prevent you from getting there unless it's illegal content. Let's see, in particular, Congress has considered but never passed numerous bills related to net neutrality and common carrier regulation of ISPs. So Congress has not deemed it important enough to pass a regulation or to change the ISPs into common carriers. Third, the Commission's post-enactment conduct with respect to the 96 Act underscores the significance of its current shift. Just 2 years after Congress passed the 1996 Act, the Commission concluded that Internet access services are appropriately classified as information rather than telecommunications services and should thus be immune from Title II regulation. And this is important because the makeup of the FCC changes with each administration. So again, if the FCC comes out and makes these regulations, and let's say Donald Trump wins in the next election, then he will come in and remove the regulations. And that's already happened. We saw it. The Obama administration put in net neutrality regulations. The Trump administration took them out. And now the Biden administration has put them back in. And if the Trump administration, it's kind of funny saying that, he'll be back, but if he were to come back in, then his administration would pull them out again, almost certainly. So it's not stable. That's why it's important to have legislation that's going to do this. And that's why I think that's a big reason why this should not go through. And what they're saying here is, years ago, this is what the FCC thought. And now they think it is Title II, and the FCC is going to think it's not again as soon as we have a new makeup of the FCC. That's an issue. Finally, the order strays into areas well outside the Commission's comparative expertise. For example, the order claims that Title II is needed to address national security risks, but absent specific statutory language, there is little reason to think Congress assigns such decisions to the Commission rather than agencies with more relevant expertise. And that's true. The FCC is not normally going to be getting into cybersecurity risks. In fact, we've got there's a whole agency now for that, CISA, that is working on cybersecurity kinds of things. So this is kind of outside, or that reason for doing this is outside of the purview. Really, pretty much every reason the FCC gave for implementing these net neutrality regulations, if you look at what they want, what they're saying, the case that they're making, has nothing really to do with net neutrality. It's other things like we can do things related to cybersecurity. We'll have more authority. So they're looking for more regulatory over broadband providers. And if they want to do that, then Congress needs to give them that authority specifically. They can't go to the 96 Communications Act and say, oh, we're going to switch to Title II because, number one, based on certainly the major questions doctrine, it looks like that's not going to be the case, and they're switching back and forth. So I can see the reasons. I think they're making a good case here for why this would be overturned. The Commission lacks clear congressional authority or authorization to reclassify broadband. The 1996 Act does not provide clear congressional authorization for the order. Courts have on multiple occasions found ambiguity in the statutory language, which by definition means that Congress has not clearly authorized the Commission's current exercise of authority. In particular, both the Supreme Court and the D.C. Court have held that it is at least permissible to classify broadband as an information service immune from Title II regulation. That alone makes plain that Congress did not clearly subject broadband to Title II treatment, and that's because the courts, if it was clear, the courts would not have ruled that way, or said that. I should not ruled, but said that that was the case, permissible. But even setting aside the major questions doctrine, the better reading of the 96 Act is that broadband is an information service. Start with the text. Unlike a telecommunications service involving pure transmission, broadband providers provides users with the capability to engage with information on websites and applications. It is thus an offering of the capability to do all of the actions set forth in the statutory definition: generating and making available information by posting on social media, acquiring or retrieving information from websites, storing information online, and transforming, processing, and utilizing information in limitless ways, from editing photos to playing video games. And I wanted to show you some of the language that they're talking about. First, if we look here, this is an information service. So again, kind of some of the words they were pulling out of this is the Act, the 1996 Act. Information service. The term information service means the offering of a capability for generating, acquiring, storing, transforming, processing, retrieving, utilizing, or making available information via telecommunications. So a lot of the things that they were talking about there, transmitting, stuff, utilizing files, those kinds of things, but does not include any use of any such capability for the management, control, or operation of the telecommunications system or the management of a telecommunications service. And then telecommunications carrier, this is they were talking about just, I think they mentioned it here, hold on. The term telecommunications carrier means any provider of telecommunications services, except that such term does not include aggregators of telecommunications services. Telecommunications carrier shall be treated as a common carrier under this act only to the extent that it is engaged in providing telecommunications services, except that the Commission shall determine whether that the provision of fixed or mobile satellite services shall be treated as common carriage. So that's the telecommunications carrier and the common carrier. And then I think maybe it was before that, or maybe it was after that. Hang on here. Oh, here it is, telecommunications. The term telecommunications mean the transmission between or among points specified by the user of information of the user's choosing without, no, that wasn't it. I thought there was something in here that they were pointing to under the telecommunications part. Yeah, unlike a telecommunications service involving pure transmission, I think that's somewhere in there as well, telecommunications being just pure transmission. Consumer perception, which is critical to determining the content of ISP's offering, and they mention a case here, Brand X, confirms that broadband is better understood as an information service, so they bring up that case law. Broadband is also an information service because the service itself offers information service capabilities, such as DNS and caching. So they're making their case, and I think it's a good one as far as the FCC really doesn't have the authority to do this. Now, that's regardless of whether you think more net neutrality regulation or rules need to be in place or not. The question that we're looking at is, does the FCC have the authority to do that? And really, they don't, because the Act specifically separates out telecommunications, common carriers, and information services like internet broadband. So it's specifically designated two different areas. So then to take broadband operators out of information services, or to say that they need to be under the common carrier thing under telecommunications, doesn't really make any sense. So it's at the very least, it's a major question, I think, that the Supreme Court would overturn based on the fact that, again, they're not considering or they're not allowing agencies, or will not be allowing agencies, and certainly with this case that's coming up, to make significant changes or interpretations of law based on their power versus, again, having to go back to the courts. So again, and the rest is there, and I don't know how strong these cases are. They're making a case on how net neutrality regulations will harm the public. Certainly, again, any regulations that are not needed can be burdensome, and they can be especially burdensome on smaller operators. They can mean that service providers maybe will not have as much to invest as they're having to pay lawyers and make sure they're in compliance of things. Those kinds of arguments. That's in there. But I think more importantly, the question is, does the FCC have the authority to do this? That's really the crux of the matter. And if they don't, then and people feel like net neutrality regulations are needed in one or more areas, then Congress needs to act. And Congress these days doesn't act much because it's a very divided Congress. That can be good, because sometimes the more Congress does, the worse it is. I think it's almost like I don't know if the founders designed it this way. Obviously, they put checks and balances in our government to make sure that no one branch of government has too much power. So you've got the executive branch, you've got the judicial branch, you've got the legislature. The legislature makes the laws. That's the problem here, is that the FCC is maybe making law, or certainly they're doing more than interpreting the law by saying, by changing what broadband service providers are categorized if it's not clear in the law. And then you've got the judicial branch that then determines, is this constitutional? Is this law constitutional? Is this what the meaning of the law should be? Those kinds of things. So we've got that in place. But in the legislature, it's also very divided, so not a lot can get done. And I don't know if that was, separating the House and the Senate and all of that was on purpose. Maybe the founders were thinking, you know what, we need to make it really hard to get things passed because, power corrupts and all those kinds of things. So that's maybe another check that we don't think about. But the fact that not a lot gets done when things are divided, which is good, because if the country's divided and Congress is divided, that means that people have strong opinions on both sides. And even though you may feel very strongly that your opinion is correct, there might be, as many people on the other side that feel that their opinion is correct. So do we want to be then plowing forward programs and things that are not necessarily not necessarily everybody's in agreement with. So let's all try to work on those things where there's good agreement. Let's get those things done, and those should go through if everybody's agreeing on something. So thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. If you learned something new, if you give me a like on the video, we'd like that. And if you're not subscribed to our channel, click the subscribe button and ring the bell to be notified when I'm live, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.